start. When you are one of the organizers of the conference, that you can manipulate the conference to serve your own lecture. That's why Itzhak Kraus was speaking right in front of me, so I can use half of his lecture as introduction. So Itzhak, thank you. But then again, my lecture will be kind of epilogue to you, so you are using me back. In any case, besides the revolutionary idea of collective teshuvah that Yitzhak already spoke about. In Judaism, teshuvah is something that always works, right? There are three things with which you can repair reality. Kol teshuvah, kol tefillah, kol tzedakah. With teshuvah, repentance, tzedakah, distribution of money to needy or to poor, and tefillah, prayer. But everybody always spoke about individual teshuvah. And Rabbi Alkalay comes and says, individual teshuvah can bring you individual salvation, whatever it means, if there is such thing in Judaism. But collective teshuvah is a political thing. Collective teshuvah means what we do as a people together. And as a people together, it's a question of return to the land of Israel. Right. His second revolution in Jewish thought is his very, very special interpretation of the concept of Messiah, son of Joseph. And I personally believed for years, but now I checked, so I can say that yes, his idea of Mašiyah ben Yosef was actually modeled after the Prince of Serbia, Miloš. He was looking from Zemun at what was happening here, and that was the role model for his development of his concept of Mašiyah ben Yosef. So a few facts of life. Rabbi Leon Yehuda ben Shlomo Hai. This thing is actually supposed to be Hebrew head, age with a dot below. So just like any other Yehuda in Sephardic tradition, basically his name on the street was Leon. Why? Because Leon is the sign of the tribe of Judah, and because of the pasuk, the biblical verse, which says Gur, Aryeh, Yehuda, and so on. So when signing in Latin letters, he would sign as Leon Alkalay. But when signing in Hebrew script, he would always sign as Yehuda ben Shlomo Hai Alkalay. Now there is plenty of mistakes. Some people believe that Hai Alkalay is the second name. Other people believe that Hai is part of his name, so Yehuda Hai Alkalay. Nothing of this obviously is not true. The second name is Alkalay, his personal name is Yehuda/Leon, and his father is Shlomo Hai. So he was born 1798 in Sarajevo. Then, in modern Hebrew literature, Yehuda Burla made this beautiful novel in two parts, Ba'ofek and Kisufim, Nostalgy and On Horizon. And he developed the idea, which appeared before that, I don't know from where, that Rabbi Yehuda spent his youth in Jerusalem, learning in Yeshivot of Jerusalem. Never happened. He learned in Yeshivot of Sarajevo. That's what he himself is saying. His first big trip was from Sarajevo to Zemun, and in Zemun he started serving immediately as Melamed Tinokot, or Hebrew teacher. So in 1828, for official appointment in Zemun. In 1839, his first book, Grammar Hebrew, or book of how to teach Hebrew in Ladino. 1840, his first Zionist book, still in Ladino. And then 3 years later, he starts publishing in Hebrew. And he was also, pay attention that he was using word kibbutz for the new issue for the people who will write, and later we have kibbutzim. And he was using 20 years, I believe, before Bilu, which was the movement in North and Eastern Europe. He used that verse from the Bible, Bet Yaakov lechu v'nelecha be'or Adonai, the house of Jacob, let's walk in the. So basically, he was a trendsetter in so many different fields. He didn't coin the term Zionism, but more or less everything else are actually his inventions, who were later developed more successfully or less successfully or whatever by other people. He was even more visionary than Theodor Herzl himself, because Theodor believed, he was Europocentric, and he believed that, you cannot revive Hebrew. I mean, you can pray in Hebrew. But Rabbi Alkalay believed, of course, that the language spoken in the land of Israel should be Hebrew. Now, here you can see how he is signing Yehuda Leon Alkalay. But when he's writing the Hebrew script, he never uses his Spanish name, Leon. Okay, here you can see also his signature, obviously written in Solitreo, which is the Sephardic cursive, and a bit about the intellectual biography. So here he is basically speaking about when he moved to Zemun and became Melamed Tinokot, how he had to remember the methodology that was used by his father, Rabbi Shlomo Hai Alkalay, who was a very known Melamed Tinokot in Sarajevo, and pay attention to the thing in green. It says, Hineni Kaparat Mishkavo. Right? That's a Kabbalist expression, which means, may I be atonement for his sexual misbehaviors. That's the way to translate it. Why I'm pointing to this? Because you will soon see, but before that, here you can see at the end of the introduction to his Darchei Noam, Hebrew grammar, his cousin in Belgrade is doing the same job. As you remember, those of you who were with us at the excursion, we said in 16th century the most important Jewish center of Jewish learning besides Salonika in this part of the world, in the Balkans, was Bitola, monastery in present-day Northern Macedonia. In 17th century, the most important center of Jewish learning besides Salonika was Belgrade. Then the Austro-Hungarians came and they conquered the city, and they plundered the Jewish community. They took the rabbis and sold them all over Europe. So the famous rabbis like Yehuda Lerma died a bit before that, but his sister's son, Rabbi Yosef al-Mozdino, and the famous Rabbi Yosef ibn Danan, and so on, all these people were sold as slaves, as servants. So Yosef ibn Danan later went to London and became a rabbi there. This is when the Jewish community of Belgrade actually becomes dependent on the Jewish community of Sarajevo. And we can see that in 18th century, Rabbi David Pardo establishes e-ješive in Sarajevo, and ever since, most of religious posts in Belgrade and Zemun are filled with the kada, from Sarajevo. So we can see that one guy from Sarajevo is coming to Zemun, and his brother's son is doing the same job in Belgrade. So his brother's son is writing in the addition to the introduction, and he says, oh, I'm so fortunate that my uncle wrote this book because I was trying to imitate the way my father taught me Hebrew, but I couldn't remember 1 out of 100. Okay, so this is only some kind of intellectual background. And here you can see he's mentioning his rabbis, so he says, V'chen kibalti mirabi u'borei harav u'muflau v'od Adonai maleh kevod morenu v'rabenu harav Rabbi Yaakov Finzi zichrono lechaim Avraham Abba hineni kaparat mishkavo. This is a very interesting, we don't find it a lot. Rabbi Finzi was not related to him. Actually, I didn't translate it. He says, and this is the tradition that I received from a tremendous rabbi full of divine glory, Rabbi Yaakov Finzi. May his memory be for everlasting in the world to come. May I be atonement for the sins of his sexual misbehavior. And they are not bloody related. So this follows, this is a Sephardic tradition, local tradition. You don't find it a lot around the world, that your intellectual father is more important than your biological father. And then actually all the courtesy that applies to your biological father, you also apply to your intellectual parents. So this is the same way, this is actually, the original quotation should be brought in Ladino. That before was Hebrew translation, right? And here you can see the chief rabbi of Belgrade is Yaakov Finzi. He's the son of Rabbi Finzi, from whom Rabbi Alkalay learned in Sarajevo, right? And this Rabbi Finzi and Chacham Alkalay, they also had one's daughter married to another's son. So it's all beautiful rabbinic mafia, and this is the translation of Zohar, right, of the Book of Splendor, a Kabbalistical work, produced in Ladino by the brother of the chief rabbi of Belgrade, who was also in-law with the Rabbi Alkalay, and so on. And this is chief rabbi of Sarajevo, Leon Yosef, who is the son of the chief rabbi of Belgrade. I'm just trying to make you a picture so you can understand what's going on. And this is the book of the chief rabbi of Sarajevo, printed in Belgrade, of course. Here you can see his signature, right? Yehuda, Ben Kevod, Moreno, Verabeno, Arav, Rabbi Yosef, Hashem Yishmereu B'Chayeu. And then this is his signature also in Ladino script. And here you can see how Rabbi Alkalay is mentioning Pele Yoetz, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yitzchak Papo, one of the famous Musarnikim, the ethical school in Judaism. And again, he is using the same abbreviation, Hineni, Kaparat, Mishkavo, even though they were not related. Okay, and now here I'm getting to what I want to talk about. And that's, this is the list of his books. So above you have it in Hebrew, below you have it in Serbian, in Cyrillic script, and here you have it in Latin script. And you can see 17 monographical works and hundreds of letters and epistles and articles and articles written in response to something and so on. This is his first book, Darchei Noam, the Hebrew grammar, or the book to how to teach Hebrew. It was printed in Belgrade during the Sultanate of Abdul Majid, right? This is the second one already mentioned, Shalom Yerushalayim. This is the first one in Hebrew, in Hat Yehuda. And this is the last one. Obviously, I'm not going to bring all the slides, but this is the last one. Menachem Zion, the Consoler of Zion. This is the original script, the original autograph, the manuscript of his book, Raglei Mevaser. And right, and here you can see how Rabbi Alkalay himself, it's not my imagination, he himself is writing back to somebody who was asking him a question. What makes you think that Turks will ever give us autonomy within the Ottoman Empire? And Rabbi Alkalay answers him and he says, why should we be any different than the Serbs and the Wallachians? And the Wallachians are actually Romanians. And Romania, under the Russian pressure on Sublime Porte, the Romanians were actually first to be given autonomy within the Ottoman Empire, and then they brought a Fanariotti family from Constantinople to rule them as princes. And later, when Miloš will ask the same thing for him. In Serbia, there was already a precedent in Romania, and Rabbi Alkalay is actually pointing to that fact. And he says, why should we be different than them? There are already two precedents. The Romanians as first president, and then the Serbs. So it's not imagination. It's all written there. Now here I want to talk about his concept of Mašiyah ben Yosef. This unusual sign is basically supposed to be age with a dot below. And look at here. He says basically. ושמו להם ראש אחד ועלו מן הארץ. And they will appoint to themselves a single leader, and then they will move from the land, from all different lands. So basically, in 1861, he was thinking of the possibility of first a prince being appointed in diaspora, and then he will lead the Jews back to Jerusalem. But for him, basically, and when he explains where did he come from with this idea, he says the Geulah will happen the same way we prayed. So first we said, give us back our judges as at the beginning, and our counselors as in the old times, no king, right? So that's exactly how we will be answered, the way we prayed. First, we will have a political leader. Later, he will come to Jerusalem. He will rebuild it. And then the Messiah will come. Then the Mashiach ben David will come. Now you can see he's beautiful. He is, first of all, he is the most beautiful. I met many such combinations. He's the most beautiful combination of Western and Eastern scholarship. On one side, he was the master of the Rasha. And then on another side, he meets all these modern, assimilated European Jews, and they tell him, do you really believe that, you know, on base of your Rasha? And he says, of course it's not on the base of the Rasha. First you have an idea, then you make a Rasha, right? And that's what he, right? First you have an idea, and then you make the Rasha. It's not that from my Rasha you should learn. No, this is an idea. And then I put it into the Rasha in order to make it easier for people. And look at his Rasha, I never saw anything similar. Shema Israel. Okay, so the word Shema Israel, here Israel, which is basically the major principle of Judaism. Listen, Israel, the Lord our God is one. And he says, Shin Mem Ayin is abbreviation of Sultan Majid Abdul, right? So actually, when we started saying Shema Israel, right? The name of the Sultan during whose reign the redemption will happen was already implied there. And also, you know that during the Shema Israel, immediately after pronouncing loudly Shema Israel, we say Baruch Shem Kevod Mokto Le'olam Va'ed in low voice. And the Midrash says that this is because Shema Israel is not, listen, people of Israel. No, it's the children of Israel, when Yaakov, called also Israel, was dying. So he asked them, are you monotheist? I can die only if I know that you are surely monotheist. And they told him, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Listen, Israel, our Father, our God is only one. And he said, Baruch Shem Kevod Mokto Le'olam Va'ed, and then he died. And then he calls this Asefah. The Asefah of the Banim was the first Asefah, right? And then later we will have another assembly at the end of days. So you can see how he compares the present Geulah, the Geulah which according to him started in 1840, with different redemptions that have already happened to the people of Israel. And he says, consequently, the first Redeemer, no, this is about the Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. So he says, consequently, the first Redeemer. In other words, the appointed prince that the sons of Israel will elect and appoint upon themselves, he will be called Mashiach ben Yosef. And why? Because he is similar to Yosef. The same way Yosef, biblical Yosef, was sent to the land of Egypt to prepare the way for his brothers to come. The same way Mashiach ben Yosef will be the appointed head of the people of Israel, sent to the land of Israel to prepare for them the way. No, this is not traditional Mashiach ben Yosef. Traditional Mashiach ben Yosef is not appointed by people, he's appointed by God. And besides that, he is supposed to suffer. He's the suffering Mashiach. The idea is basically, that's what the science is saying today, the research is saying today. The Jews invented the concept of Mashiach ben Yosef in order to explain to themselves what happened with Bar Kokhba. There was an insurrection. Everybody believed that Bar Kokhba was the Mashiach. The rabbis proclaimed him to be a Mashiach, and then it wasn't successful. So you need to explain it. You say, well, of course he was a Mashiach, but we have two. One will not be successful, and then the next one will be successful. In any case, ever since that was invented, the rabbinical Judaism is operating with the term of Mashiach ben Yosef as unsuccessful. God appointed Mashiach. And here we have him as successful, people appointed Mashiach. It's great, it's good. So in any case, you can see how the redemption of Israel will not be entire unless both Messiahs come. The Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, that you can see that he's using those terms so often that he uses abbreviated forms for them, right? Just like you say ADF or NATO, not being compared or whatever. But the idea the idea is that terms that you use all the time, you don't write them all together. And then he says, אבל גאולת המשיח בן יוסף, לאו איהו אמור בגלותה כי הדבר ביד הצדיקים, ואנשי המעשה, ונקבצו ושמו להם ראש אחד ועלו מן הארץ להחזיר שכינתו לציון. Or in another words, they will appoint to themselves and so on. We already discussed this idea. The Rosh HaKibbutz. Now, how do you call the Jews returning to the land of Israel? Kibbutz, right? Kibbutz would be the modern Hebrew mispronunciation. But basically, it should be kibbutz, just like kiddush. And then he speaks about the new issue, about the people coming to Israel. And he says, Verosh HaKibbutz nikra Mašiyah ben Yosef, right? Okay, and then he says, Azai HaMashiach ben Yosef dehainu Rosh HaKibbutz asher yeh bayamim hahem. And then, Uvesof ha'elef ha'shishim. By the end of the 6th millennium, Mashiach ben David shall come. So basically, who is Mashiach ben Yosef? Whomever Jews pick amongst themselves, whomever Jews choose or elect, or so on. But later, he develops this idea, and he says, I don't know whether it's here. Let me just see. He says, and according to my humble opinion, the assembly itself is the Mashiach. So you don't even need to have a single person. The assembly is the Mashiach. Now, this was not only revolutionary from the point of view of changing the content of old terms, but also in basically it could be secular, whatever. Ben Gurion, he's Mashiach ben Yosef. What's the question? The Parliament of Israel, that's Mashiach ben Yosef. What's the question? And so on. So all these things are totally revolutionary. Nobody ever taught this way before him. And why I wanted to make introduction in order that we can see who were his intellectual teachers, who were his intellectual fathers. The rabbis who preceded him, they were all Zionists in traditional way. What does that mean in traditional way? All of this was a single country. So Belgrade and Sarajevo and Sofia and Istanbul and Izmir and Jerusalem and Beersheba, it was a single country. So for the Jews of the Balkans, Eretz Israel was like Florida for the rich Jews in America, right? When you are young, you live in Manhattan, you make your money, but then when you are old and New York is cold, you go to Florida. Most of our rabbis are not buried in Sarajevo. Most of our rabbis are buried in Jerusalem. Why? Because once they are 60, 70, they move there. Okay, so, but his rabbis, they were always striving to move to Israel. But that's a personal act of devotion. It's individual religion. But that's not, they were, to such extent, they were good old Sephardic Ottoman conservatives that, for example, his teacher, Rabbi Eliezer ben Tzchak, says, the Jews should always live in the Ottoman Empire. Why? Because in the Ottoman Empire, when people go to bathroom, then they wash their hands. And in Europe, people are using toilet paper. I mean, they wash their thing and then they wash their hands. And in Europe, people are using toilet paper, which means that they are all praying chicken. Or, you should always strive to move to the Ottoman Empire, because in the Ottoman Empire, you are not expected to give hands to ladies, right? So Jews who live in Europe, the society expect. I'm just trying to show to what extent they were conservative. So he couldn't inherit from them this revolutionary. They were individual Zionists. You should strive personally to get to the Holy Land. Now, this is his model for non-suffering Mashiach ben Yosef, the very successful Miloš. So a few facts of life. The first Serbian revolution, and it shouldn't be called the first Serbian revolution, it should be called the first successful Serbian revolution, because the Serbs actually had insurrections every 50 years against the Ottoman Empire. But this was the first successful. So the first successful one was in 1804, it lasted until 1813, and then during the first revolution, Miloš was already appointed by Karađorđe as the leader. In 1813, the Turks actually managed to crush the revolution. The leader of the revolution, Karađorđe, escapes to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Then 1840, Miloš cooperates with the Turks in the pacification of the land because he understands that the Sublime Porte will actually do genocide if the people do not cooperate. And then he cooperates. However, though, there were still mass repercussions of the Turks against the Serbs, and then there is a second revolution, and the second revolution is very successful, and then also the international ambassadors, especially the Russians, are executing pressure on Sublime Porte, and then Miloš, who serves as the role model for Rabbi Alkalay, he actually he totally changes the policy. Instead of confrontation, no, he's adopted son of the Sultan, and the Sultan is his adopted father, and he really appreciates the Sultan. But the Sultan needs to understand that Serbs are like this and like that. They are really executing a lot of pressure on him. And the Sultan needs to help him. And he's only trying to have peace. And he was extremely diplomatic and extremely successful. Just in order to show you to what extent things were unusual. At the same time, there was insurrection against the Ottoman Empire in Bosnia, led by Bosnian Muslims. And they were, for hundreds of years, the keepers of the gate of the empire. And they were the most faithful sons of the Sultan, and they were of Islamic faith. But when Sultan started making reforms, those people stood against him. And then Sultan treats in two totally different ways the Serbian Prince Miloš and the leader of Bosnian Muslims. So you remember that slogan, it's the economy stupid? Well, it's the attitude stupid. In other words, Miloš was not confrontation. It was all Machiavelli and manipulation and diplomacy and so on, while the Muslims in Bosnia confronted the Sultan, and Sultan basically made quite a genocide over the aristocracy of Muslims. So you can see here what made Rabbi Alkalay believe that if you act faithfully towards the Sultan, he can actually give you the autonomy. And in that quotation that I originally mentioned, when he says, why should we be different from the Serbs and the Romanians, he adds a very interesting addition. He says, when we are really faithful to the Sultan, you know, the Sultan should really have at least one single nation that's really faithful to him, because nobody is. The Greeks are not, and the Serbs are not, and the Bulgarians are not, and the Romanians are not, and the Jews are. So if he gave autonomy to the Serbs, how much more? So I'm just trying to explain the setting. I don't believe he would ever think this way if he didn't see the success of Miloš Serbia. So you can see how Miloš also changed from an Ottoman rebel to a European leader combined with Ottoman heritage, because you can still see the high Ottoman head, and so on. This is the second insurrection. No, I'm going the wrong direction. Okay, so this is Miloš. No, sorry. And I'm ending. I know, Luke. I know I should. I don't have to. Okay. We don't have time to speak about Shabbats, but let's. His prophecies are really amazing, and he had quite a few. So I will not dwell on the prophecy already mentioned by Yitzhak, because it's, in Ladino we say estremeciente, right? It makes your hair go up. The guy is basically saying in 1839, next year the gates of mercy will be open, and we have 100 years. We have 100 years to go to this. And simple mathematics, 1940. So he also made such interpretations of the immediate past. What happened in Sfat was basically the last of the Tzireha Mašiyah ben Yosef, obviously, and so on. So basically, to make a long story short, there is plenty of also untranslatable, place of words and so on, and all of this will more than obviously convert into an article, so you can read and for the article I will really have to translate all these quotations. But he's also a traditional rabbi, so he gives the reasons. But look at his reasons. He says, "Ve'ata rabotai deu ne'emana, ki kol hatzarot ha'ele hem le'orer le'ravenu al yeshuv eretz Yisrael." So, in traditional rabbinic Judaism, you have something that I call rabbinical autism. What rabbinical autism means is that Gentiles do not play a single role in the Jewish history. Jewish history is basically a question of whether you are faithful to God or you are not. If you are faithful to God, He will send you a good king, and you will prosper. If you are unfaithful to God, God will send a king which will punish you. But when God picks the king by whom He will punish you, He always picks the king who is totally sinful, because when people make teshuvah, then God can break, the stick with which He used, and so on. So the rabbinical Judaism always interprets everything that happens as the direct result of whether you keep Shabbat or you don't, whether you eat kasher or you don't, and so on. Now he's using the same traditional technique. But for him, we are punished for forsaking the political aspects of Judaism. And so everything that happens to us is, I didn't translate it to English. So he said, all the bad things that are happening to us is to wake us up in order to move to the land of Israel. And, so Sephardic rabbinic humor, I will just, because he's also continuing the tradition, and I want to show that also. There are things which he picked in the yeshiva in Sarajevo. So this one I love. I know. This one I love. Especially, he says, we already ate, comimos. We already ate 1,770 years of life in the diaspora. So what kind of divine present for us is this? La tierra perdimos y el mar nos quedó. We have lost the country, but we have stayed with the evil. Right? So this is a typical Bosnian rabbinical joke. And here you can see you already showed the pictures. So this is the Har HaZatim, the Mount of Olives. This is the grave of Rabbi Alkalay and his wife. And I already spoke about this, so I'm switching to these. Yes. So basically, yes, I'm switching to all these, and then you can see how actually in every bigger city in Israel there is a street called after him. Then the Yishuv or Yehuda is called after him. I know that you will say that it's not, but what Susie showed us before is actually from the newspaper at that time. And in the Israeli newspaper they are publishing that's why the city is called that way. If later they wanted to add another possibility, that's another thing. So that's it more or less, and thank you for your attention.